Ever get the feeling like when we talk about these huge figures in history, we're only getting part of the story?
You mean like a skewed perspective?
Yeah, exactly. Like, we all know about the 12 sons of Jacob. Even if you don't know the Bible, those names are everywhere.
Right. Like cultural shorthand for a whole lineage.
But his daughter, Dinah, tucked away in Genesis. And you guys requested a deep dive on her story, specifically this YouTube video that calls it one of, wait, I wrote it down. Tragedy, Honor, the Profound Impact.
Wow. Okay, right off the bat, you know it's going to be heavy.
Buckle up, because we're about to unpack why Dinah's story matters, even thousands of years later. What's your take on why her story resonates so much, even today?
Well, first off, just the fact that it survived at all, it would have been so easy for her story to get lost, you know? Especially back then.
Oh, totally. Like, how many other women's stories from that time just disappeared because no one thought they were important enough to write down?
Exactly. But the fact that it's there, even with how short it is, it just raises all these questions about, like, women's roles in these ancient societies, the whole weight of family and loyalty, and even, like, what justice really means.
Okay, so to really get this, we need to start by picturing Dinah's world for a second. We're talking nomadic, patriarchal.
And deeply, deeply religious.
Right.
Yeah.
Every part of life infused with that. So it wasn't just that she was the only daughter, but imagine growing up with 12 brothers who were basically destined to be VIPs, leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's a lot of pressure in one household.
And pressure on her too, though, in a different way. The video really emphasizes that Leah, Dinah's mom, saw her as this sign of God's favor, especially with the whole.
Or with Rachel.
Yes, with Rachel, Jacob's other wife. Like, having sons was like the ultimate win in that culture. So for Leah, each child was almost a victory lap.
Whoa, so family dynamics were intense even back then.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating how, I don't know, those dynamics play into everything. Like, we don't often think about the mothers of these biblical figures, but Leah's perspective adds a whole other layer to the story, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it highlights, you know, the kind of societal pressures women faced even back then, within their own families even. And for Dinah, growing up surrounded by all these future leaders, you have to wonder how much she absorbed, even just by being there.
Totally. Like, she's at the dinner table when they're discussing leadership, responsibility, God's covenant with their family. It's got to shape her.
Exactly. And the video even suggests she wouldn't have been totally excluded from their education, just not groomed for leadership in the same way.
That makes sense, yeah. Like, she's present, but not in line for the same destiny. And this is where her story, even though it's just a few verses in the Bible, it speaks volumes.
For sure. It's like this tiny window into the lives of so many women whose stories never got written down. They were there, vital to the community, but invisible in a lot of ways.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens in Shechem, because this is where Dinah's story takes, like, a really sharp turn. It starts with her wanting to, like, connect with the local women. Seems normal enough, right?
It does, to us. But the video makes this point of saying that even that desire, it speaks to Dinah's character.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. In a society where women were basically expected to stay within their family circles, her wanting to engage outside of that, it challenged the norms, even in that small way.
She was stepping outside the lines, even if she didn't mean to.
Right. And tragically, that desire for connection leads to the central conflict of the whole story. Her encounter with Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite.
Yeah, this part is tough, but crucial.
Absolutely. And the video doesn't beat around the bush either. It straight up says Shechem saw her, took her, and raped her. It's a stark reminder that violence against women is not new, not at all. It's rooted so deep in our history.
What really struck me is how the video then talks about Shechem wanting to marry Dinah. Like, it feels impossible to reconcile with what just happened.
And that's exactly why this cultural context is everything. The video argues that Shechem's proposal, shocking as it is to us, needs to be viewed through the lens of honor and shame, which were huge, huge deals back then.
So not about love, but about
control, yeah. Social standing. Possessing Dinah, even through marriage, it was a way for Shechem to, at least in his mind, try to fix the damage he'd done. Not just to her, but to his family's honor, too. You got to remember, they weren't just individuals. Their actions had these ripple effects on their entire clan.
And this brings us to the brothers' reaction, which honestly is just as intense as Shechem's actions in the first place.
Right. The video uses the phrase intense and righteous, but it's key to remember that their whole concept of justice, completely tied up in this honor-shame culture. Dinah's defilement wasn't just a personal offense to them. It was like a direct attack on the family's standing in the community.
Like everyone is trapped in this system, driven by these deeply ingrained societal codes. And once things escalate like this,
Yeah.
I don't see a way out.
That's the tragedy of it, right? What starts with Dinah just wanting to connect with other women turns into this whole cycle of violence and revenge. And it doesn't end pretty.
Yeah, and it's easy to look back and judge, the brothers' actions, especially by today's standards.
Right, like from our modern perspective.
Exactly. But the video really makes you stop and think about their mindset back then. In their world, they had to respond forcefully. It was about protecting their family's honor.
Anything less would have been unthinkable.
Oh, totally. Seen as weakness, like a sign they weren't strong enough to defend their own.
So they were trapped by their own culture in a way. In a way, yeah. But even then, the way they went about it, their plan for revenge was like cold and calculated.
Yeah, it wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing, was it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
The video points out all these details that showed just how premeditated it was. Like, they pretend to agree to the marriage, right?
Right.
But they use that to get access to the city, to Shechem.
And then there's the whole thing about the circumcision.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other layer. They make it a requirement for the marriage for all the men.
As a way to, ensure religious purity before the wedding.
Right, exactly. Which, I mean, on the surface, it kind of fits with the whole cultural thing.
But really, it was a tactic.
100%. It left all the men of Shechem totally vulnerable, unable to fight back.
Showing how they used a religious ritual as part of their strategy.
It really shows how, like, religion and power got all tangled up back then.
The video called it a, cold, hard strategy.
And then the attack itself. Simeon and Levi, Dinah's own brothers, they lead this massacre. And even knowing the context, it's just
horrific.
There's no other word for it. The video uses terms like unrelenting brutality and a scene of utter carnage. And it's important to not shy away from that.
Definitely not. Whatever their reasons, the results were devastating.
Absolutely. And then you have Jacob's reaction to all of this. He's not just angry, he's scared.
Yeah. The video really emphasizes that fear, and it makes sense.
He's thinking about the bigger picture, right? Their survival, they were outsiders living among people who, let's be honest, didn't really want them there.
And now his sons had
Just poured gasoline on the fire?
Basically. He even says to them, "You've made me a stench to the inhabitants of this land."
It shows that contrast, right? Between the sons, impulsive, driven by rage, and the father trying to hold it all together.
But also recognizing the weight of what they'd done. There's no going back.
Exactly. And the thing is, even with Jacob condemning their actions, his sons totally believed they were in the right.
They were protecting their family, or at least that's how they saw it.
Right. And that's what's so unsettling, you know? It's a reminder of how differently people saw justice back then.
And how cultural norms could be used to justify almost anything.
It makes you think, doesn't it? About what we justify today in the name of whatever we believe in.
It's clear, though, that this one act of violence against Dinah, it explodes outward.
It's like a ripple effect, impacting way more than just her immediate family. That's something the video really drives home. This wasn't just a personal tragedy. This was political, with ramifications that changed the game for the Israelites.
So how did this event affect relations with other groups in the region? Like, did this change how the Israelites interacted with the Canaanites and the Perizzites from that point on? It's like you said, this wasn't just a family drama playing out. It became this huge political thing.
Right. And you can bet it changed things. Imagine being one of the neighboring groups, right? Hearing about what happened in Shechem.
Talk about tension.
The fear, the mistrust, it's palpable even now just thinking about it. Like, the video suggests this event basically slammed the door on any peaceful relations between these groups.
It's like before there was maybe some hope, some chance of coexisting, and now.
Now the Israelites are the others. Dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Which probably just fueled more conflict down the line, you know?
And even within Jacob's own family, we see the consequences, right? What about that curse on Simeon and Levi?
Oh, yeah. Heavy stuff. Even though the other brothers were in on the looting and all, Jacob calls those two out specifically for their cruelty.
He knew they had crossed a line, even by those days' standards.
Right. And the prophecy that their descendants would be scattered among the other tribes, that wasn't just a casual thing.
It was like a fate worse than death, almost, in their culture.
Yeah.
Right? To not have that unity, that lineage held together.
Exactly. He was talking about their legacy, the far-reaching impact of their choices.
And think about how that must have played out, not just politically, but psychologically within those tribes later on. Oh, you're descended from them, huh?
Totally. A mark that doesn't go away. But here's where it gets really interesting. because despite that curse, the video talks about how the tribe of Levi, they eventually become priests.
What? Seriously?
Yeah.
I'm drawing a blank. That's not how I remember it.
It's true, and it seems like such a contradiction, right? These brutal warriors, their descendants, become the ones in charge of religious law and ritual.
Talk about a 180.
Right. And the video presents it as this kind of divine paradox, like it wasn't erasing what their ancestors did, but transforming it.
So the Levites, by serving in the temple, they're also kind of atoning for the past in a way.
You could see it that way. It's this powerful example of how even the darkest stuff can lead to, I don't know, an unexpected kind of redemption, maybe.
That's a lot to chew on. And it makes you think about Dinah in all of this. It's so easy to just, I don't know, relegate her story to the sidelines.
Right, like a footnote, the victim in a story about men.
But this video challenges that, doesn't it?
Big time. It argues that her story, even though it's short, even though it's tragic, it forces us to look at some uncomfortable truths.
About power, about how women have been treated for, well, basically forever.
And not just then, but now.
Exactly. It makes me realize, like, we can't just read these ancient texts like they're simple stories, can we? We have to engage with them, ask tough questions, keep in mind the context of when they were written.
Totally. It's not about saying, oh, that was okay back then or whatever. It's about understanding just how complex human beings are, how we make choices, and how those choices echo through time.
Dinah's story might be ancient history, but the themes, power, justice, gender roles, the trauma of violence, that's all still incredibly relevant.
If not more so, right?
We started this deep dive wanting to uncover the hidden significance of this one woman's story. And I think we did that, but we also unearthed even more questions along the way.
That's how you know it's a story worth telling. It sticks with you.
It makes you think if this story, tucked away in the Old Testament, can still spark debate and make us question things. What else is out there? What other hidden gems are we missing?